Hello and welcome to race 3 of the Hobart Challenge, the second leg of the national circuit of racing for 18-foot skiffs. Once again, the conditions look like providing us with plenty of action. Warwick Brooklyn is with me once again, and how was it amongst the crews last night, Warwick?
A lot of tension there, Bill. The conditions have played havoc with the mental toughness of a lot of these guys, and I think the guys that can tough it out today will probably come out on top.
And at the start, Elabashe and Prudential in a bit of strife as the gun goes, and once again Andrew Devola positioned Skill Engineering beautifully at the start. Out to his right, Bank of New Zealand got away first, Skill Engineering second, Xerox third, and they have made a tremendous fist of this, but Prudential, which has got 2 wins up on the board, is out the back door early in this race.
And that's exactly what he didn't want, because he needs to win here to seize the championship, to take control of it again from Phil Barnett.
Tasmania naturally different, doing well, as was Prima Drinks, but look at these guys struggling. Prudential and Elabashe struggling as Bank of New Zealand burns up the track from that start line up towards the top mark. Once again, conditions pumping up through 25 knots after it was soft just a few minutes ago before the start. But certainly there, we can see it. Cameron McDonald, the sheet hand on board, Bank of New Zealand, easing sheet as the gust hits them. Now pulling it back on as the gust goes away, and very, very difficult conditions. If he doesn't do that hard yakka, they're going to finish up flat on their back in the drink, and they're doing it extremely well at this stage. Bank of New Zealand leads to the top mark first time.
Well, he got out of the blocks very well, Bill, and Xerox is hot on the hammer, and the breeze is starting to increase. There's a new front coming down over the mountains, and certainly the boats will accelerate, and it's not a good time for that because they've got to turn the boats around, get their spinnakers up, and get on down the course. Prudential is battling it out down the back with Elabashe, and they need to get up the front, but the front coming over the top of the mountains is playing havoc with the boats there. Tasmania in the drink again, and he's in all sorts of trouble this weekend.
Rounded the top mark third, looking really good. With them was Skill Engineering, and that's bad luck for Andrew Dale on Tasmania, naturally different. And now suddenly up into third position is Prima Drinks, just over the other side of Prudential there. Prudential and Elabashe suddenly find a big hole in the breeze. Now Prima Drinks gets hit by a gust and nearly knocked over. Nearly a collision with Prudential. Prudential struggling to get up around that top mark. In the meantime, Xerox and Bank of New Zealand have shot off down the track, and Prudential really struggling in this race, and now having a near collision with Elabashe at the top mark. And Prudential nudging the mark as they round the top mark to complete the first leg of this course, which started at that start-finish point. They've sailed up to the top mark, most of them. They go to the wing mark, then down to the bottom, back up to the start-finish line. That constitutes 1 lap, and they're doing 2 laps, and Skilled Engineering, who rounded really well in third position, has now gone for another swim.
And the breeze is different all over the course, Bill, and there's a lot of luck involved in where you are at a certain time in the race, because when you're trying to get those spinnakers out of the boat and set, if there's a big gust comes, they get knocked over. At other times they can get away, get it set, get settled down, and then get the breeze. But Bank of New Zealand is handling the conditions very well and heading for the bottom mark with a nice lead over Xerox.
And interesting, there's so much pressure out there at the moment. The breeze has swung around to the south slightly. You saw Prudential and Xerox without spinnakers. Behind them now, Prudential and Elabashe have got different breeze. They've been able to set their spinnakers heading off down the track. And already after a really fast 2-sail reach down the bottom mark, Bank of New Zealand have got almost down to the bottom mark, and they're not jibing. They've got such ferocious breeze strength there. They've decided against that direction change where they just switched through the direction. They've gone right round in a circle, and that's allowed Xerox to come powering through on a 2-sail reach with the wind coming over their left-hand side. A bit of timidity on the part of Bank of New Zealand there has let Xerox through.
Well, that was a pretty wussy thing to do, really, Bill. They had a chance, they were in the lead. They had to go for broke, and they just whooshed around doing that manoeuvre, which cost them probably about 1.5 minutes when they could have done it in about 15 seconds, and they've just let Xerox take the lead.
And indeed, Xerox now in the lead. Bank of New Zealand right behind them second. Third, Elabashe. Fourth, Prudential now changing directions as they come down with the breeze behind them, and you can see how different the wind that they have is to the wind that was carried by both Bank of New Zealand and Xerox, because they've got spinnakers set and they're having to change directions. But in the meantime, at the front of the fleet, Xerox and Bank of New Zealand battling it out, now about 200 metres away from the bottom end of the course through this race, and there's a big black gust hitting them right now.
And the black gust on the water means a lot of breeze, and the light patches mean no breeze, so tough conditions.
just over 1/3 of the way through this race, and Xerox now rounding up at the bottom end of the course. And right behind them now, Bank of New Zealand had the lead. They're now second. Fourth, Elabashe, or maybe third, because they're doing a little bit better. Over in the background, Prudential coming down with Spinnaker 2, and truckloads of speed here.
They're certainly flying. You can see that Elabashe just a moment ago jumped completely clear of the water. And now Bank New Zealand, after wussing around, had to get back and get aggressive to get Xerox, because Phil Barnett is not going to give this away for nothing.
It was a surprise to me that the Bank of New Zealand did take a conservative approach, although there you see another gust hit them and it's really savage out there. But very rarely do you see Scott Ramsden take a conservative approach. He did on this occasion, and there's no doubt that in this sort of racing, if you go quietly, the wheels fall off.
Elabashe just coming up to drop their Spinnaker soon. Forward hand running in, grabbing this sheet that controls the Spinnaker. Prudential is hammering down, trying to close that gap, and going for the drop now. Harmsman runs in with him, has got to pull that Spinnaker down. Big red sail under control, put it into a bag inside the boat, put it away so they can go upwind to complete lap 1.
Elabashe rounding the bottom mark, but they've left a big gap between themselves and the mark, perhaps 20 metres, and that's 20 metres they've lost in this race. Out to the left, Prudential coming in, Prudential coming much closer to the mark, so whilst they were behind Elabashe, I now have them very even, perhaps even Prudential ahead. Up ahead in white, we've got Bank of New Zealand and Xerox leading. In pink, we've got Prudential and Elabashe just round the bottom mark. In blue, the rest of the fleet trying to catch up, doing the best that they can.
Yes, and while I've been a little bit critical of that manoeuvre early on Bank of New Zealand, it is a tough decision. I mean, do you throw caution to the wind and maybe capsize and throw the race away, or are you a bit more conservative and throw time away? That time it worked out for Xerox, but Scott Ramsden, if he wants to win this, he has to throw caution to the wind now and get stuck into it.
Prudential a little bit higher up to the wind. They're zigzagging their way up into the wind. Prudential changing directions now, going through attack, so the wind now coming over their left-hand side. In the background, Elabashe continuing out to the left-hand side of the course, and the carnage continues for Andrew Dale and the young men on board. Tasmania naturally different. They've got the Spinnaker set there, so they recovered from the first capsize. Now a second one's put them in the drink, and in the meantime, the front runners, Bank of New Zealand, going very nicely.
Looked like to me, Bill, that Tasmania actually broke some gear. The Spinnaker pole, the long pole that sticks out the front of that boat, looked like it was broken. So I'd say another sad day for them.
Xerox leads, Bank of New Zealand second, getting up towards that start-finish line for the second time after the start, and at the moment Xerox in charge. Tip-top white high-five on our way down now. Andrew Cuddy is not driving this skiff today. We've got a local sailor from Hobart, Stuart Hamilton, a world champion in the fireballs. He's gone on board to give it a go because Andrew Cuddy's got broken ribs. A great effort by Stuart Hamilton. Elabashe coming up also, and there we see the conditions playing havoc with them again. Xerox in the background, Bank of New Zealand back in third position, trying to get up, and at the moment doing famously.
We can see Xerox there is actually in no breeze at all. And the progress so far is Xerox first, Bank of New Zealand second, Prudential third, and Elabashe fourth. But a battle developing between Xerox and Bank of New Zealand, and another battle between Elabashe and Prudential. And Bank of New Zealand tacks to get up through the gate to try and edge back that gap on Xerox. And certainly with one lap down and one lap to go, this is wide open.
Phil Barnett, the skipper of Xerox, and at the moment in charge of the third heat of the Hobart Challenge. And bringing these skiffs down to sunny Hobart has been a major logistical exercise. The crews had to get in their cars out of Sydney on the Thursday night. They drove down to Melbourne overnight, and there they had to load the skiffs into the Sea Road Tamar, where they were driven across. And let me say that it wasn't just the skiffs that went on board the Sea Road Tamar, it was their cars as well. And here we see the Xerox skiff going on board. They drove them into the ship. The ship then sailed from Melbourne over to Launceston. They arrived in Launceston, were driven back out again by their crews, and driven all the way from Launceston down to Hobart to commence racing. The rest of the crews had to board planes first thing on Friday morning. They arrived down in Hobart at 6 a.m, straight out on the track for practice session, and then out racing on Saturday and Sunday. So no effort spared, and a great effort by the sailors to get down here. A great effort by Xerox in particular just at the moment in this race as they get up to the top mark for the final time. Bank of New Zealand closing up on them, and the race closing up as well.
And the Bank of New Zealand is starting to mount a challenge to Xerox, and they've sailed this upwind leg superbly. They're pulling them back all the time. Now all they've got to do is keep the pressure on and they could take a win here in Tasmania. Xerox rounds the mark for the last time, and we see a little bit of mast sticking out the top of that mainsail there. That means they've got their main reefed. Bank of New Zealand has a full main, in other words all the sail area available, and this could tell on the downwind leg. Bank just turning around, jibing now, and they will set their spinnakers and chase Xerox to the finish.
Xerox taking a very conservative approach, carrying that reef in their mainsail, which means that they've got less power in the sky. That means it's a little bit more controllable. Bank of New Zealand doing better with the set here. Very tight indeed at the top mark. Scott Ramsden getting it set beautifully, doing a better job on board Bank of New Zealand than Xerox. Xerox has got a wine glass. Wine glass on Xerox.
And that's fantastic. Bank New Zealand, that's what they're capable of. And they're showing the goods now. Xerox in all sorts of strife, and Bank of New Zealand's got the hammer down and clearing out. Now Xerox may have just got out of that because I think they might be taking a little bit of breeze from the Bank of New Zealand. And there's a drag race developing. The Bank has a slight advantage there. And certainly this race is on for young and old.
The breeze coming over their right-hand side. They're in a good, strong patch at the moment, but at any moment, of course, as we've seen around this part of the course so many times, as Big Dave Gibson joins Dave Ewing out on the wing, they're generating more and more pressure as they feel the gust coming. They have to get more crew weight out the side to sustain their momentum. And now skipper Phil Barnett sitting inboard, but now coming second.
Well, the Bank of New Zealand deserves to take a win. They've been up there a lot of times, and they've just missed out. They had the lead early on, and then through a manoeuvre of, being very conservative, they lost a lot of time. But now they're back in a commanding position. Xerox is doing everything they can to try and pull them back, but I think a little bit better breeze for Xerox there, and they're starting to close the gap.
Now just coming back through the start-finish area, through the gate, and round about now 4 or 5 minutes to go in this race. Bank of New Zealand in charge, but nothing at all between them. Back up the course, we can see that Prudential and Elabachet now just getting up towards the top mark, so there's a big gap between first and second, and then the gap between third and fourth as the Xerox changes directions now to try and get some different breeze to Bank of New Zealand and get back under them, but Bank of New Zealand covering.
That was a great job on the Bank of New Zealand, and just before that I could see Cameron McDonald, the sheet hand on the Bank of New Zealand, watching every move of Xerox, and it's a tactical battle developing here, so this is great racing.
I reckon Phil Barnett will choose to just bide his time here. The conditions are so ferocious that anything can happen. He'll be concentrating on just staying afloat.
Now all the Bank has to do, they've got good breeze there, they've just got to keep it together, stay calm, get a really nice drop, and then cover Xerox all the way to the finish. If they can do that, they might just take out Heat 3 down here in Hobart.
Skilled Engineering getting back up on the pace. They had a capsize earlier. Skilled Engineering now up into 5th position and making up a bit of territory. Bank of New Zealand's dropped their spinnaker. Xerox not dropped their spinnaker. Getting down to the bottom mark now. Who's got right away?
Well, Xerox is just probably trying to get an overlap at the mark, but at the moment Bank of New Zealand has right away. They can force them up, but this surprises me a little bit. Scott, if he was really aggressive, he could just get up there and punch Xerox and knock them out. And Xerox, in all sorts of trouble, and that's it. That's it. The race is over for Phil Barnett. He will not win from here.
What a disaster now. These guys have been sailing perfectly all series. They've hardly made a state all season, and suddenly they get caught out by Bank of New Zealand, carried their spinnaker too far. Bank of New Zealand took a conservative approach, dropped it earlier, and they're now in charge. Elabachet rounds the top mark, 2 legs behind. She's in 4th position. Just before her rounding that mark was Prudential, but up ahead Bank of New Zealand changing directions, zigzagging their way up towards that finish line. They're totally in charge of this race and look most likely to win it, but it's a sad old sight in the foreground.
Well, that might be a sad sight for you, Bill, but I can tell you what, Scott Ramsden will not be shedding a tear because he wants to win this race, and there will be no love lost for him, for Phil Barnett. And certainly these guys have just got to try and get up, get on with the job, and get as many points as they can, because Rob Brown has got 2 out of 2, and oh my God, there's more disaster.
Oh, goodness me.
These guys just cannot pull a trick.
Well, broken gear all over the place on Tasmania, naturally different, just really in strife. Bank of New Zealand making their way up, sailing conservatively, and Scott Ramsden is great when it's tough. He's, in my opinion, the up-and-coming young skipper just at the moment and going very well in this series indeed. Alabache coming down, doing battle with these guys. This is the battle for third and fourth because let's not forget Xerox is at the bottom mark. We saw them get upright, so they're already upright and going back up the course, as we can see out on the course, and Prudential and Alabache still battling it out for third and fourth.
Well, that's Prudential in third at the moment, and if they can hurry up, they might be able to get Xerox. And remember that Prudential, Rob Brown, is leading the series, and Alabache is in fourth position, and they are absolutely screaming.
Rob Brown pouring all the pressure on, all three crewmen fully extended on the wings, because whilst they've won the first two heats, they've got to stay up there in this one to make sure that they hold their dominant position. Alabache getting down towards the bottom mark. Neil McDonald going for the spinnaker drop. Xerox is up and running again, so Xerox has rounded that bottom mark. Despite the capsize, she is still in second position. Up ahead, she's chasing Bank of New Zealand. There's now 300 metres between them. Bank of New Zealand comfortable, but with these conditions, Warwick, anything can happen.
They certainly can, and we've seen the change all before. This one down here in the Derwent isn't over until they get across that finishing line, and Alabache on the way down and Xerox on the way up to try and get second place and get some vital points to get away from Prudential.
So Xerox now comfortable again with that reef particularly. Perhaps a little bit of a conservative decision there, not doing them any harm up ahead of them. Scott Ramsden changing directions now with the breeze coming over their left shoulders, those sailors going as close as possible to directly into the wind. Only now 150 metres from the finish line, if that. And Scott Ramsden headed for another very creditable victory. And as I say, this boy has got heaps of potential. Prudential has rounded the bottom mark ahead of Alabache, so Prudential up into third. Prudential crossed ahead of Alabache. Alabache still on the way down. But it's Bank of New Zealand getting up towards the finish line. They've sailed a terrific race. On board, Charlie Diekman looking for that finisher's gun. Cameron McDonald in the middle. Scott Ramsden hanging onto that tiller, the driver. Now going through attack. They can't be far away from the finish line. Nice smooth tack.
And I think I might be owing Scotty a drink after this one, because I knocked him a little bit for being conservative, but he stuck to his guns, and it's paid off for him. And maybe that's why I'm an armchair admiral these days, Bill.
Well, I must say a lot of people say excellent things about the crew on board Bank of New Zealand. Charlie Diekman gets a lot of credit for his capacity to call the breeze and to give information to his skipper. There's always conversation going on between these sailors, and the crew, it's the crew's job to tell the skipper where the breeze is coming from and to make sure he heads in the right direction. And the boys have done it great for young Scott Ramsden here today. Bank of New Zealand now coming up to the finish line. They're going to win this race, and that means there they go through the line, and the boys happy as can be.
Very happy boys, and well-deserved victory. They've been knocking on the door a lot this season, and they've only taken a couple of wins, but they deserve that today. And Phil Barnett in second, and it's going to be a battle to see who can get third place between Prudential and Alabache.
But I think Prudential's got the gap, but it's interesting here that Xerox has now beaten Prudential in this race, so Prudential won the first two. Xerox has finished ahead of them in this one, and that keeps it wide open in the Hobart Challenge. Prima Drinks coming up in about fifth position, and they've done very well today. Despite a couple of capsizes, David Lamond has kept the Prima Drinks going all throughout the race, never stopped trying, and they're going very nicely, and they're in with a good position today in the third heat of the Hobart Challenge.
And the back markers are still battling it out. There's Skill Engineering rounding in sixth position, going up the final windward beat, in other words into the breeze, to get up to the finishing line to complete this race. And Stuart Hamilton, who was skippering Tip Top White High Five, has replaced Andrew Cuddy, who had a terrible accident in race one. And we spoke to Andrew to find out what happened.
We didn't anticipate what was happening, so it was basically my own fault. But yeah, it was pretty fluky, and we copped it.
You came pretty close to sailing today. What pushed you over in the end?
The reason I didn't sail today is the doctors gave us a fairly healthy dose of pethidine, which made me a little bit drowsy, and I wasn't very much use for anything.
And that indeed is a drowsier version of Andrew Cuddy to the one we're used to. But anyway, back to the racing. Bank of New Zealand, a very good victory. Xerox back in there with their second, Prudential third. Progress scores now after three heats, and we see that it's closing up at the head of the field. Prudential leads, Xerox second, Bank of New Zealand very close to them, and so is Alabache. Scott Ramsden pilots the Bank of New Zealand to an excellent victory today. Phil Barnett and his team made a miraculous recovery at the bottom mark after that capsize. And of course, Rob Brown had his troubles at the start. The final result is that the series is wide open once again. We'll be back tomorrow to see exactly what occurs.